Audiobook review and summary script, Pretty Girls by Karin. What if the person you trusted most in the world, the person who held your hand through grief, slept beside you every night, and knew every secret you had, was hiding something so monstrous that discovering the truth would destroy everything you believed about your life? And what if that truth was connected to a young woman who vanished decades ago? No body. No confession. No closure. Just a family shattered by one question. What happened to Julia? Today, we're talking about Pretty Girls by Karin, one of the darkest, most disturbing, most addictive psychological thrillers you will ever read or listen to. This is not a cozy mystery. This is not a gentle domestic thriller with a neat little twist at the end. This is a book that grabs you by the throat in the first few pages and does not let go. It is brutal. It is emotional. It is shocking. And for many readers, it becomes the kind of story you finish and then just sit there in silence, trying to process what you've just experienced. So if you love psychological thrillers, crime fiction, true crime-style mysteries, broken families, buried secrets, and stories where every answer leads to something even darker, stay with me. Because Pretty Girls is about grief, survival, sisterhood, deception, and the terrifying truth that sometimes monsters don't live in the shadows. Sometimes they live right next to you. Pretty Girls by Karin is a dark psychological thriller centered around two sisters, Claire and Lydia, whose family was destroyed years earlier when their older sister, Julia, disappeared without a trace. At the time of Julia's disappearance, she was a young college student. She went out one night, walked away from her friends, and was never seen again. No body was found. No clear suspect was arrested. The case remained open, unresolved, and emotionally poisonous. Years later, the family is still broken. Claire has built what looks like a polished, comfortable life. She is married to Paul, a successful architect, and from the outside, she seems to have everything: money, security, status, and a stable marriage. Lydia, on the other hand, has lived a much rougher life. She has battled addiction, raised a daughter on her own, and fought hard to rebuild herself. She is funny, tough, defensive, and deeply wounded. And these two sisters do not speak. Their relationship is not just distant, it is fractured by years of pain, blame, resentment, and misunderstandings. Julia's disappearance didn't simply take one daughter from the family. It destroyed the entire emotional structure of the family left behind. Their father became obsessed with finding answers. Their mother tried to survive by holding the remaining family together. Claire and Lydia each coped in different ways, and those coping mechanisms pushed them further apart. Then, decades after Julia vanished, another act of violence cracks open the past. Claire's husband, Paul, is murdered during what appears to be a random attack. But in the aftermath of his death, Claire begins to discover things about him: hidden files, strange secrets, disturbing clues that suggest her husband may not have been the man she thought he was. And suddenly, the murder of Paul, the disappearance of Julia, and the abduction of another young woman in the present day begin to form a terrifying pattern. That is the engine of Pretty Girls. It starts with grief. It moves into suspicion. And then it descends into something far darker than Claire or Lydia could ever have imagined. Main plot overview. The central mystery of Pretty Girls begins with Julia's disappearance. Years before the main events of the novel, Julia vanished from Athens, Georgia. She was 19 years old, full of life, independent, rebellious, and deeply loved by her family. But like many real missing person cases, the investigation was shaped by assumptions. Maybe she ran away. Maybe she was irresponsible. Maybe she left on purpose. Those kinds of judgments haunt this novel. Karin shows how quickly society can turn a missing young woman into a suspect in her own disappearance. Julia's personality, her choices, her independence, even her youth are used against her. Instead of being treated purely as a victim, she becomes a question mark. For the family, this uncertainty is unbearable. Not knowing becomes its own form of torture. Julia's father cannot let go. He keeps searching, keeps writing, keeps trying to reconstruct the final hours of her life. Her mother tries to move forward, but moving forward feels like betrayal. Claire and Lydia, still young when Julia disappeared, absorb the trauma in completely different ways. Then, years later, Claire's husband Paul is killed. At first, this seems like a separate tragedy. A horrible random crime. A life destroyed in seconds. But after Paul's death, Claire starts uncovering secrets that make her question everything about him. She finds evidence that suggests Paul had a hidden life, and not just a small hidden life, not just an affair or a financial secret. Something much worse. Meanwhile, Lydia is pulled back into Claire's world. The sisters have been estranged for years, but the past is no longer willing to stay buried. Their shared trauma becomes the key to understanding the present. What follows is a tense, disturbing investigation into who Paul really was, what happened to Julia, and whether the two mysteries are connected. And the deeper Claire and Lydia dig, the more dangerous the truth becomes. #Key characters. Let's talk about the main characters, because this book is not just plot-driven. It is emotionally driven by wounded, complicated people. Claire Scott. Claire is one of the central figures of the novel. At the beginning, she appears controlled, privileged, and somewhat detached. She has a wealthy lifestyle and a long marriage to Paul. But beneath that surface is a woman who has spent years avoiding emotional pain. Claire's life has been shaped by Julia's disappearance, even when she tries not to admit it. She has built her identity around stability, around marriage, around the idea that Paul is her safe place. So when Paul dies and his secrets begin to surface, Claire is forced to confront two horrors at once, the grief of losing her husband and the terror of realizing she may never have truly known him. Her character arc is one of the most compelling parts of the book. She goes from protected and dependent to suspicious, angry, and eventually much stronger than she believed herself capable of being. Lydia Delgado. Lydia is Claire's estranged sister, and honestly, she is one of the most memorable characters in the novel. Lydia is sharp, sarcastic, messy, loving, and deeply human. She has survived addiction. She has raised her daughter, Dee, with fierce protectiveness. She has made mistakes, but she has also fought hard to become someone better. Unlike Claire, Lydia's pain is visible. She does not have the glossy exterior. She is not trying to look perfect. She carries her history openly, even when she jokes to hide it. Her relationship with Claire is painful because both women have reasons to be angry. They have both been hurt. They both remember the past differently. And they both carry guilt. But as the story unfolds, their broken sisterhood becomes one of the emotional anchors of the book. Julia. Even though Julia is missing, she is the ghost at the center of the novel. She represents everything the family lost: innocence, trust, stability, and the future they were supposed to have. Through memories, letters, and the investigation into her disappearance, Julia becomes more than a mystery. She becomes a person. That is important because one of the most powerful things Karin Slaughter does is remind us that victims are not plot devices. They had lives. They had personalities. They had families who loved them. Julia's absence shapes every page. Paul Scott. Paul is Claire's husband, and he is one of the most unsettling figures in the book because of how the reader's understanding of him changes. At first, he appears loving, intelligent, successful, and protective. But after his death, Claire begins finding pieces of a life he kept hidden. The question becomes, who was Paul really? And Karin Slaughter uses that question to explore one of the scariest ideas in psychological fiction, the idea that intimacy does not always equal knowledge. You can share a house with someone. You can share a bed with someone. You can share years of your life with someone. And still not know what they are capable of. Major themes. One of the reasons Pretty Girls hits so hard is that beneath the thriller plot, it is really about trauma. Family trauma. Julia's disappearance breaks the family in different directions. No one escapes untouched. The parents lose their marriage. Claire and Lydia lose their sister and each other. The family becomes a crime scene that never gets cleaned up. Grief and ambiguous loss. This book captures the specific agony of not knowing. When someone dies, grief is devastating, but there is a ritual, a funeral, a place to put the pain. When someone disappears, grief remains open-ended. Hope becomes torture. Every phone call might be news. Every unidentified body might be the answer. Every year without closure becomes another wound. Deception. Deception is everywhere in this novel. People lie to protect themselves, to protect others, to control the narrative, and sometimes to hide evil. Karin Slaughter is fascinated by the gap between appearance and reality, and Pretty Girls is built around that gap. Survival. Claire and Lydia are both survivors, but in very different ways. Lydia survives by becoming tough and self-reliant. Claire survives by building a controlled life and not looking too closely at the past. But the novel asks, what happens when survival strategies stop working? Justice. This is not just a book about discovering the truth. It is a book about whether truth can lead to justice, and what justice even means when the damage is already done. Resilience. As dark as the book is, it is also about resilience. Especially female resilience. It is about women who are underestimated, traumatized, dismissed, and lied to, but who still fight back. Most shocking moments. Now, I'm going to stay spoiler light here, because Pretty Girls is a book you really need to experience for yourself. But we do need to talk about the kinds of shocking moments that make this novel so infamous. First, there is the early act of violence that changes Claire's life. It is sudden, chaotic, and emotionally devastating. Karin Slaughter does not ease you into the darkness. She throws you into it. Second, there is Claire's discovery that Paul had secrets. And the horror of those secrets is not just what she finds, it is the realization that her entire marriage may have been built on illusion. Third, there is the connection between past and present. Julia's old disappearance, Paul's hidden life, and the current case of another missing young woman begin to overlap in ways that are deeply disturbing. Fourth, the reunion between Claire and Lydia is full of emotional tension. These sisters are not instantly healed because danger brings them together. They argue. They accuse. They reopen old wounds. And that makes their relationship feel real. Finally, the deeper discoveries in the novel are genuinely upsetting. This is where I want to give a content warning. Pretty Girls deals with extreme violence, exploitation, and crimes against women. It is not for every reader. Some scenes are graphic and emotionally intense. But the shocking moments are not just there for shock value. At its best, the novel uses horror to expose the brutality of misogyny, the failures of systems meant to protect victims, and the way predators hide behind ordinary lives. Why readers love it. So why do so many thriller fans recommend Pretty Girls when it is such a hard book to read? Because it is almost impossible to put down. Karin Slaughter understands momentum. She knows how to end a chapter in a way that makes you say, okay, just one more, even when it is midnight and you have work in the morning. The pacing is relentless. Every revelation creates new questions. Every answer makes the situation more dangerous. The book constantly shifts between emotional family drama and high-stakes crime thriller. Readers also love the complexity of Claire and Lydia. These are not perfect heroines. They are flawed, angry, damaged, sometimes frustrating women. But that is exactly why they feel real. The sister relationship is one of the strongest parts of the novel. Their bond has been damaged by years of pain, but underneath the anger is love. And watching them slowly confront what happened to their family gives the thriller an emotional depth that many crime novels do not have. Another reason readers love this book is the sense of dread. From the beginning, you know something is wrong. You know secrets are waiting. You know the truth will be awful. But you still need to know. That is the addictive quality of Pretty Girls. It makes you afraid of the answer, and desperate for it at the same time. How the novel builds tension. The suspense in Pretty Girls works on several levels. First, there is the mystery of Julia. What happened to her? Why was the case mishandled? Did someone know more than they said? Second, there is the mystery of Paul. Who was he beneath the surface? What was he hiding? How much of Claire's life was real? Third, there is the present danger. Once Claire and Lydia begin uncovering secrets, they are no longer just investigating the past. They are putting themselves in danger now. Karin Slaughter also uses emotional suspense. It is not just will they solve the mystery? It is. Will Claire break under the truth? Will Lydia be able to protect her daughter? Can these sisters forgive each other? Can a family survive the truth after surviving the unknown for so long? The tension comes from both external danger and internal collapse. That is what makes the book so gripping. Why the story is so disturbing. Pretty Girls is disturbing because it feels uncomfortably possible. Not every detail, necessarily. The plot becomes extreme and thriller-like. But the emotional truths are real. Women do disappear. Families are dismissed by authorities. Victims are blamed. Predators can appear charming and respectable. People can live double lives. Grief can destroy families. The book taps into real fears, the fear of being taken, the fear of not being believed, the fear of discovering that someone close to you is dangerous, and the fear that justice may come too late. It also has a true crime atmosphere. The missing girl case, the family obsession, the old police files, the unanswered questions, all of that gives the story the feeling of a cold case being reopened. If you enjoy true crime documentaries, podcasts about unsolved disappearances, or thrillers where past crimes echo into the present, this book will likely hook you immediately. But again, it is intense. This is a book to approach with caution if you are sensitive to graphic violence or crimes involving women. Karin Slaughter's storytelling style. Karin Slaughter's storytelling is powerful because she does not look away. Her writing is sharp, emotional, and brutally direct. She is not afraid to make readers uncomfortable. In fact, discomfort is part of the experience. But what makes her work stand out is that she balances darkness with character depth. The violence in her books is often shocking, but the emotional aftermath matters just as much as the crime itself. In Pretty Girls, she is especially good at showing how trauma lives in the body and in relationships. Claire and Lydia are not simply strong female characters in the generic sense. They are wounded, defensive, funny, terrified, and brave. Slaughter also writes family dynamics with painful accuracy. The resentments. The things left unsaid. The way one tragedy can divide people who should have clung to each other. And she knows how to structure a thriller. The reveals are carefully placed. The danger escalates. The past and present collide. And by the time you understand the full scope of the story, you realize she has been tightening the trap from the beginning. Comparisons to other thrillers. If you enjoyed books like Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, or Sharp Objects, also by Gillian Flynn, Pretty Girls may appeal to you, but it is darker and more graphic than many mainstream psychological thrillers. Like Gone Girl, it explores the lies inside a marriage. Like Sharp Objects, it deals with family trauma and buried female pain. Like true crime cold case stories, it follows the long shadow of a disappearance. And like the best crime fiction, it asks not only who did it, but what the crime did to everyone left behind. But Karin Slaughter's tone is harsher, more visceral, and more emotionally brutal. She does not soften the edges. She wants you to feel the fear, the rage, and the grief. That is why this book is so memorable. #### life lessons and psychological insights. Underneath the thriller plot, Pretty Girls contains several powerful psychological insights. First, unresolved trauma does not disappear. It waits. It reshapes families, personalities, and choices. Second, not knowing can be as destructive as knowing. Ambiguous loss traps people between hope and grief, and that emotional limbo can last for decades. Third, appearances are not evidence. A perfect marriage, a polished career, a charming personality, none of these guarantee goodness. Fourth, survival looks different for everyone. Lydia's survival is loud and messy. Claire's is controlled and quiet. Neither is simple. Fifth, truth can be devastating, but it can also be freeing. Sometimes the thing people fear most, the answer, is the only path toward justice. And finally, resilience is not about being unbroken. It is about continuing even after you have been broken. That is what Claire and Lydia represent. #### final verdict. So, what is my final verdict on Pretty Girls by Karin Slaughter? This is a 5-star thriller for the right reader, but it is not a casual recommendation. It is dark, graphic, emotionally heavy, and deeply disturbing. If you are looking for a light mystery, this is not it. If you are sensitive to violence, especially violence against women, please check content warnings before reading or listening. But if you want a psychological thriller that is intense, brilliantly paced, emotionally devastating, and impossible to forget, Pretty Girls delivers. The audiobook, narrated by Kathleen Early, also adds another layer to the experience. A story like this depends heavily on emotional tone, grief, suspicion, fear, rage, and the narration helps pull you into the tension and heartbreak of the novel. This is the kind of audiobook that makes you sit in your car after arriving home because you need to hear just one more chapter. It is not comfortable, but it is gripping. #### call to action / memorable conclusion. Pretty Girls remains one of Karin Slaughter's most talked about psychological thrillers because it combines a chilling mystery with a devastating portrait of a broken family. It asks terrifying questions. How well do we really know the people we love? What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? And how far would you go to uncover the truth about someone who vanished? This book is disturbing because it feels personal. It is addictive because every secret leads to another. And it is unforgettable because beneath all the darkness, it is really about two sisters trying to survive the truth. If you've read or listened to Pretty Girls, I want to know what you thought. Did it shock you? Did you see the twists coming? And do you think this is Karin Slaughter's most disturbing book? Drop your thoughts in the comments, but please keep major spoilers hidden for new readers. And if you enjoyed this audiobook review and summary, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more dark thriller reviews, mystery breakdowns, and audiobook recommendations. Because the best thrillers don't just ask who did it. They ask what the truth will cost. And in Pretty Girls, the cost is everything.